You're listening to Nutrition Matters Podcast with Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist.
Hi everyone, it's Paige Smathers. Thanks so much for being here. Nutrition Matters Podcast explores what really matters in nutrition and health with a sensitive and realistic approach. To help support the podcast, please consider making a donation at positive-nutrition.com/podcast. If you find this episode interesting, engaging, or helpful in your life, please consider donating, sharing with friends and family, and leaving a review on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, whatever podcast app you use to listen to this podcast. You can leave a review about this podcast straight from your podcast app. Search Nutrition Matters Podcast, click reviews, and then write a review. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook if you'd like to have a little more food for thought. Thank you for listening.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Nutrition Matters Podcast. My name is Paige, and I'm so excited to bring you this podcast episode that I had with Leslie Schilling, who is the co-author of a book called Born to Eat. This is a book that is sort of Rebecca Scritchfield, who some of you might know, is also a dietitian and an author. She said, "Born to Eat is like a trustworthy friend showing you the ropes of feeding your infant with love and compassion." I love that description, and that's kind of how I felt as I was reading it. So this book is all about, it talks a lot about how to instill a sense of confidence and trust for your child, to trust their own bodies, for you to be able to trust your child, to raise kids who are confident in their bodies and who are confident in their ability to feed themselves. So this book does such a good job of kind of breaking it down, talking about your fears, talking about maybe misconceptions, talking about the nutritional side of things, behavioral side of things. It does focus a lot on self-feeding or baby-led weaning, and we talk about that a bit in the podcast episode, but if you're interested in that approach for your child, or if you're just interested to learn about it, this is a really, really good resource for that as well. So Leslie is a registered dietitian in actually Las Vegas now. She recently moved, and she talks about that in the podcast episode. She has practiced in lots of different settings as a registered dietitian, including infant nutrition, general pediatrics, and children with special healthcare needs. She is the owner of Schilling Nutrition, which is a Vegas-based private nutrition and wellness consulting business. She spends the majority of her time working with young families, those of all ages with disordered eating issues, and then also sports nutrition, so professional athletes and performers. She's been featured in many, many different mediums, including Self, BuzzFeed, the Huffington Post, U.S. News, Pregnancy Magazine, the Yoga Journal, HGTV, and more. And I'm so excited to bring you this podcast episode where we talk all about this concept and this philosophy of Born to Eat. So for those of you who are like, I'm not a parent, this is not going to be interesting to me, I don't need to listen to talking about how to feed an infant, I want to encourage you to listen, because I think you'll still learn something, even if this doesn't feel directly applicable to you. I think indirectly we all are around kids. We have nieces, nephews, grandkids, people in our lives who, have children, and just kind of being informed and educated about some of this stuff can be really interesting on an educational and intellectual level, then also can have some powerful implications on shifting our culture. So keep listening. I'm excited you're here. Along with that, I also want to make sure everybody knows about my brand new online course called Positive Nutrition 101. This is a course that talks about the art and science of nutrition without all the gimmicks. So if you've ever felt like, man, I just want to learn more about this nutrition concept, but I don't want it to be dripping in diet culture, that is exactly why we created this course. So I've teamed up with Jessie Hoffman, who is just months away from getting her PhD in nutritional sciences, and we created this course that's all about helping you more confidently kind of navigate your way through diet culture and to really understand some of the scientific principles that often get confused or taken out of context or even just totally lied about when someone's trying to get you to follow some type of diet or plan. So check out that course, see if it might be a good fit for you. You can find it at positive-nutrition.com, and then click on the Academy tab. And then, as always, if you're interested in joining the conversation outside of the podcast, you're welcome to join us over in the Nutrition Matters podcast community on Facebook. Just search for that and ask to join, and I will approve you as a member. And then just beyond that, if you're able and willing to leave a podcast review and or make a small donation, all of that is super appreciated.
And one more quick word about this podcast recording. Leslie and I had kind of some trouble with connectivity, so it will sound like I've edited something sometimes in the podcast episode, but really it was just we had some connection issues. So don't be alarmed if the audio isn't the best podcast episode audio you've ever heard from me, but I do my best here. Can't be perfect, and I just kind of let it be what it is and trust that, people will be patient with me as things are imperfect. So thank you for that in advance. And with that, let's get into talking with Leslie. Hi, Leslie. Welcome to Nutrition Matters podcast.
Well, thanks for having me today.
Thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to us about your book called Born to Eat. I'm so excited to dive in.
Yeah, it's so exciting to talk about the book. It has a long history.
Okay, well, let's start there. Well, actually, before we start with the book, let's talk about you a little bit. Talk about who you are, where you live, what you do, some of your history.
Well, so I live in Las Vegas, Nevada now. The draw is from North Carolina. I'm a Carolina girl. I grew up in North Carolina and went to Appalachian State University for my undergrad and master's, and then ended up in Memphis, Tennessee for about 15 years. I had a practice there, a private practice in eating disorders, sports nutrition, and family wellness. And we got the offer. I say we because it was a big move. My husband had to pull me in on this, but he got an offer to be the chair of a department at UNLV. He is an exercise scientist, and so he got a chair offer for the kinesiology and nutrition department here in Las Vegas. And so we moved, and so went from North Carolina to Memphis for 15 years, and here we are in Vegas. And I got to do a lot of really amazing things in my career to this point. And when we moved out to Vegas, my goal was to take a sabbatical. And I was like,
how'd that work out for you?
I've been working really hard for a long time. I'm going to take some time off. So as soon as we got here, my one and colleague, DJ Peterson, was like, so I think we have a bite on our book proposal that we had put in like months and months and months ago. And so I was like, okay, so maybe we're not going to get this sabbatical after all, to just kind of chill out and get settled. So we started writing the book, and then, I do sports nutrition too, and started picking up some consulting to do some one-on-one sports nutrition with Cirque du Soleil, which is super fun because I was a gymnast growing up. So
amazing.
Totally my people. And even though they're these most amazing athletes and trapeze artists and dancers and jugglers and all these different things that they do, and contortionists, and but they're people like you and me, and they live in diet culture, so they obviously need some help as well. And so I do that. I'm currently doing some consulting work for a treatment center here that has an IOP PHP that has just opened, and so I enjoy doing groups and intuitive eating, and then I write and work on the book and try to keep up with my sweet little girl. And that's what I do broadly.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing all that. Sounds like you have a lot of cool things you're doing. The Cirque du Soleil sounds amazing, like a dream come true.
It's super fun. It's one of those things that I'm very, very fortunate. I have gotten to do some super crazy fun things in my career. So,
yay! So Vegas has got to be quite a different culture, scenery, all the things than what you're used to from North Carolina. It was North Carolina, right? And Tennessee.
Yeah, very different. But I really love the West more than I thought I was going to, actually. So I definitely see it being home for us, at least for several years. We'll see. Maybe
Yeah.
forever. You
Oh,
never know. I think I was going to leave Memphis, but here we are. So.
yeah. Well, there you go. That's a good attitude to have. Awesome. Well, Leslie, take a minute and talk about your book, Born to Eat. Talk about where it came from, why you wanted to write it, and kind of, I'll ask clarifying questions along the way, but I'm interested in that for right now.
Okay. So I think it was actually 2008 or 2009 that I was in a mastermind group. We started a mastermind group. Well, it was Rebecca Scritchfield, Wendy Jo Peterson, and myself. And they do what they're really good at, harassing me to keep up. And so they're like, Leslie, you don't have a blog.
Isn't Rebecca one of your good friends?
Yeah, Rebecca Scritchfield, yeah, and our really good friends, and Wendy Jo, of course, and they all had blogs at this point. You know, they're the ones who got me on Twitter too, and so they're like, you've got to do this. And so we were at a FNCE, a nutrition conference, and they were like, okay, before you leave here, you need a blog. And so I really was thinking about, my food philosophy. Having worked with my clients and doing the type of work that I do and my own personal beliefs and worldviews. And I was thinking, we really are born to eat, and that it just happened, like Born to Eat. That's it. That's the name of the blog. And it really started out as a belief to me. And then it morphed into a blog. And then when I had my daughter, it really just came full circle. And having worked with so many, athletes and people over the years, that I had been in practice long enough there to see how I would have an athlete that would go from high school to college to get married or whatever and have kids, and it really became this full circle of helping like adults in our diet culture who don't even know how to feed themselves or fuel themselves for their activities or their day-to-day life, and then they have this child and they're like, what do I do? And then so I had clients that I had seen over the life cycle, early, for a couple of years. And then I had my own daughter, and then realized that, wow, we really are born to eat. So not only is this my belief, I can see it, I can witness it, and I can see all these amazing things and this innate ability that she was born with. And then started kind of the proposal on the book, then actually when she was less than a year old, and it just fizzled. Life happened, and then Wendy Jo Peterson had her sweet little girl and was texting Rebecca and myself about, okay, what do I do next? How do I do this? And how do I offer this? And then after a month or two of text, Wendy Jo was like, so are we doing Born to Eat or what? And so it just, came out of nowhere, where we kind of took the proposal back out and more, worked on it together. And she had already had an agent from working on her Mediterranean cookbook, and we sent it to him, and the rest is history. And now Born to Eat has morphed into a philosophy that is now this book that also incorporates baby-led weaning and hopefully the non-diet approach for the whole family.
Yeah. So your book talks a lot about self-feeding, baby-led weaning. In case somebody isn't familiar with what that means, do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Sure. Well, I can tell you, I remember thinking when I had my daughter, I just couldn't imagine, and I think because I just couldn't imagine doing more already did for feeding a family. I was like, I just can't imagine making baby food. It just seems like another layer, another step to me. And then we had a friend who actually gave us the book, Baby Led Weaning by Jill Rapley. And what it is basically you skip purees altogether. It doesn't mean that you skip it as a texture, because it's an important texture. It just means that baby self-feeds foods of the family in a modified baby-led weaning approach, which is really what most people are doing these days. You've got the purist out there, but a modified approach is where you're keeping safe textures in mind when you do that. Like, you're not giving baby a raw carrot, you're giving them a texture that's more appropriate, and they get to. So you kind of skip the spoon. I mean, you can use a spoon, but like you can load it with, say, Greek yogurt or something, and then they can self-feed. So it really puts the baby in the driver's seat, so to speak, is how they're putting food in their mouth, and when they're stopping, are they satisfied? And so that's self-feeding. And if you think about being born to eat, I mean, a child is born and then they're hungry and they bob either at the breast or the bottle or whatever, and so they know when they're hungry, and then they know when they're satisfied. They purse their lips, they turn their head, they spit the spoon out if you're using spoon feeding, and so they know. And I think it's really up to us to help support that. And Wendy Jo and I both talk about how we're not purist baby-led weaning. There are lots of people who have done traditional spoon feeding and done just fine and let baby lead the way and really pay attention to those cues. And we believe purees are a very important texture that you have to incorporate for baby to get used to, but it's something that a lot of parents get stuck on. And so it's like progressing past that and really supporting that baby and that body trust, because if we can lay a really strong foundation of baby self-feeding, trusting how they're putting food in their mouth, and trusting their bodies when they know when they're full or satisfied, then we're, in my opinion, we're building just that first really strong layer or foundation of resilience, which I think kids growing up in our culture really need.
Oh yeah, for sure. And building that resilience, but also just supporting them in what they're innately so good at, right? Like just not
absolutely.
Doing your best to not take away from their just incredible ability to know when to eat and when to stop.
Exactly. And in the book, we're huge fans of Ellen Satter, and I was trained by her when I lived in Memphis. She came and did, a workshop for pediatricians and dietitians. And so, I mean, we are all about the division of responsibility, and, mom and dad choose what, when, where, or caregivers what, when, where, and baby if and how much. And so we support that through the book. And we think that self-feeding is kind of a simplified way to, support baby even further.
Yeah, I totally agree. Just like, I often think about how food and eating is literally the one thing that babies have from their first day of life. They really have control over it. I mean, they're able to, no one can force them to swallow. I mean, there are efforts you can make to kind of help a baby who's struggling with that, but in general, it is up to them to do that. And I think so often the feeding relationship gets super tricky because it's fighting over that sense of autonomy rather than other things, where you're trying to, as a parent, to control something that's actually in the child's control, which is what's so powerful about the division of responsibility. And for any listeners, I will link to some other episodes that I've recorded about what that is so that we don't have to spend a ton of time there, Leslie. But yeah, it's such a powerful concept to think, wow, my baby was born already knowing how to do this and already knowing how to communicate its needs. And maybe I need to learn how to pay attention to that. But it's such an incredible thing to just sit back and think about. And then when we get older, we complicate it so much, right?
Totally. And I will say it's very hard for a parent who doesn't trust themselves to trust their child. And so I think usually say that's one of the first places that we start. And in chapter 10, we talk all about that. It's, born to eat kids need born to eat parents, and living in our culture, it makes sense that some type of concern around body trust. And we have all these external controls. And a lot of us, I mean, even if you're in a health class, you're not taught to listen to your body. That's not a sexy message. Nobody's taught that.
So true.
and hopefully we can change that one of these days, and we're definitely working towards that.
We're all trying, right?
We're all trying. We're all doing the best we can with the information that we have, and so that's the thing is like if we can learn to trust ourselves, and even if we can't, we fake it till we make it. We really try our best to help our kids support that autonomy that they're born with, particularly around feeding.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so to kind of set the stage, what do you think most new parents are worried about or thinking about when they're thinking about introducing solids to their kids? For anyone who, I like to give really basic background just in case someone's like not a parent and never has been and hasn't really ever thought of this, but just in case people are unfamiliar, like ideally you would give baby milk from the breast or the bottle for the first, few months of their life, and you can talk about how long that is and how you know when they're ready for solids. But then obviously there's sort of this as much developmental sort of introduction of other foods, table foods, as it is nutritional needs. And so you start doing that as your baby gets older, and then obviously they progress to different types of foods and on and on and on till eventually they're just eating the same foods in the same ways as the family. So talk about kind of what are people worried about when they're introducing those solid foods to their kid?
I mean, as much as I don't want to say this, but we're just going to be really honest, I think a lot of people worry about being judged by others about doing something different, which is unfortunate. It's like, you're judged if you do this, you're judged if you don't do that, you're bottle feeding, breastfeeding, whatever. And I think that's the thing that if parents take anything from this is that you are the expert and the advocate for your child, and it doesn't matter what other people think. And you know your child best. And so I think a lot of times you're like, what if we start here? But my grandmother did this, or my friend next door is doing this, or my friend who does, this diet and that diet, or is super healthy perceived does this. And so we have all this information that makes us really scared to make our own decision. And so the thing I hope all parents will do would be like, so what are the foods of your family and how can we incorporate them safely? That's the first question.
That is such a good point. And just to make a little comment about that, when I was pregnant and then new mom with young tiny babies, there was this feeling of like, oh, I should be reading all these books, and then you start reading the books about what to do and how to do it right and how to be perfect and blah blah blah. And at some point, I had to just be like, I need to close the books and I need to take the things I've learned and let it come out in my behaviors and in my actions in a way that resonates with my lifestyle, and I need to trust myself that like I'm gonna do okay, right? So like I think there's this gentle balance of like you want to incorporate the knowledge of the experts, but then you also want to trust that you've been given this child and you are able to care for it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and something we say in the book and is like humans have been around for a long time. We are pretty resilient. I mean,
right.
You can do a lot of things and still turn out okay, and you can do things differently. And so, the thing we are like, what are the foods of your family, and then how do we keep some nutrition in mind when we think about first foods? We think about high iron foods, and then those vitamin C foods to help baby, with absorption, and that's really what we're thinking. What are the foods of your family, and how do we safely incorporate them? One, to support the foods you continue to make, the foods of your family. How do we serve them to baby in a safe way? And then how do we keep nutrition in mind? And that's the beauty of this approach too, is that if say you're using jar foods, and that's okay, there's a time and a place and for all that, but like that's not the foods of the family. So if you are cooking, say, steak and roasted potatoes and green beans or whatever for your family, or spaghetti and meatballs or whatever, how do we take our typical meal for the family and make it appropriate for everyone in the family? And I think that's the first question, is like, what do I really need to do to make it safe for baby? Because most of the foods that we eat for our family meals are probably going to be fine to put in front of them in an appropriate texture.
So yeah, you just highlighted two more fears parents might have. First of all, what foods in what order and different ages. Am I allowed to give him this, or should I start with this because that has less likelihood of allergies or issues or causing digestive problems, right? So there's that, but then there's also the texture concern. So how do you navigate that?
So when we're navigating textures, for example, if I'm going to cook a steak, I'm just going to use my daughter as an example. So we will cook steak, we flat iron. That was the cut we would always do because it's cost effective and it's got a nice texture. And so we would cook it to a medium and then cut it in like a strip that would be like her finger, as long as her finger or my finger, but she could hold it in her hand. Like imagine how holding a finger just with your fist, like through your palm. And so she would hold that and kind of suck on it, and she's getting nutrients from that. And early on, we're not expecting baby to get all the nutrition from solid foods, because
that's a great point.
Until a year, baby is still primarily fed a milk-based diet, whether it be formula, whether it is, whether it's breast milk, either one of those, whatever works for the family. And now food is important and texture is important. And we're not saying food is fun. Food can be fun, but a lot of times you'll hear people say food is fun for the first year, but food is also providing nutrition. And we'll keep that in mind. Foods of the family, and then appropriate texture. And so say we do green bean, it's going to be a soft steamed green bean. And usually what we tell people is you want to be able to take your fingers and mash it where it's going to be soft. It's going to be soft, or either with your lips. Can you mash it and make it, is it a soft texture? And that's kind of how you know what the texture should be for baby. And we break it down like pre-beginner, beginner, everything in the book. So, and give sample menus of all that. And then, just a little bit to play with at the beginning. And baby's around 6 months, plus or minus, depending on those developmental stages of readiness, which would be sitting unassisted, showing interest in food, being able to actually, have a pretty nice tongue thrust. So if they need to push food out, they can. And I will say this kind of leads us right into these textures, lead us right into one of the biggest fears that is choking. And of course, and the studies suggest there's no difference in traditional, which it's funny that spoon feeding is called traditional when
that is funny.
As long as just feed baby what families ate. But it's just funny. But traditional versus, say, baby-led weaning, where a child is self-feeding, there's no difference in choking according to the research. And when there were issues that were related to choking, it was usually interference, like a caregiver putting their finger in baby's mouth or pushing the spoon further back. But when baby's allowed to do that self-feeding, they are in charge of how far something goes back in their mouth. And so if they need to gag, which is a normal reflex, and it's scary at first, it's definitely scary. And as parents, are just sit on our hands and are like, okay, you got this, kid. You got it. You're more than me, And then we have that own experience of like, okay, they totally were able to handle that, and we didn't freak out.
Yeah.
They didn't freak out, and so they're like, oh, gagging's normal. That's how I keep myself safe. But choking is, when there is the blocked airway, and there's definitely a difference. And we talk about those differences, and when there's then you have an issue with breathing. So it's when we're trying to do those two things. So we have a blocked airway because of food or liquid or whatever it is. It seems like the major culprits are raw apples, and then either, putting objects in the mouth like a finger, or pushing something further than baby's comfortable for. So that's just kind of another reason why I think self-feeding is so great, because baby really is in charge to their own comfort and developmental level.
Yeah, and they develop a sense of like, I'm so big. What's more important to a little child than being like, oh, I'm doing this big thing that everybody else who I just think is so cool is doing,
Mm-hmm.
I know I see that in my kids all the time.
They show interest in what you're doing, and,
Yeah.
and you know, and then they're in the phases of trying new things and not trying new things. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, Leslie, what are some of the mistakes that you know new parents make that maybe the book you had in mind as you were writing the book, obviously with your experience as a dietitian, but then also your personal experience as a parent? What were you hoping to help people avoid?
Well, something we are really, we're advocates of parents being the number one advocate of the child. I mean, you may have, like, I have clients that I talk to regarding feeding their families and feeding their infants and how they do baby-led weaning and you know, so, or how they don't, or however they do a mixed feeding, whatever works for them. And I'm like, you were the advocate of your child. No one knows your child better than you do, including your doctor or your your pediatrician or your dietitian. You are still the head of your circle of trust. And so I think the number one mistake is when parents don't realize that, you know, I want you to go with your gut. Now you get to decide who's in your circle of trust, but you are in charge. You're in charge of this. And so we write about talking to caregivers if this is what you decide and this is what you feel like. How do you talk about that and get the support that you need? Sometimes it means getting other members in your circle of trust and leaving some behind. And we even have like letters of like, how do you talk to a caregiver?
Yeah, I saw those were great letters.
Oh, thank you. And, you know, we've used we have a feeding specialist who helped us in the book. And it's so funny, I call her a feeding specialist, but my sister is the feeding specialist. She's a speech therapist who is a feeding specialist. And she did baby-led weaning with her daughter the same time I went through. We had kids about 2 months apart. And so, and she had already used it in her practice, in her feeding practice. And so, and that was the thing is she's like, I want to help parents be more assertive when they need to be about what they want for their child, and then know when to, one of her was know when that someone wasn't going to be able to support it in a safe way, and then how do you blend the two? Like if you've got a child care facility that they're like, we only do spoon feeding, we don't know what you're talking about, how can a child feed themselves? And then she talks about, okay, well, if we're going to do spoon feeding here and then at home we're going to do self-feeding, how can you just support her being in charge and supporting her own hunger fullness cues, and so giving them some information about that. So I think the mistake is a parent thinking they're not the expert, because parents are always the experts.
Yeah, that's a huge one. I think another one that I learned about in school and then noticed myself doing the opposite, which kind of cracked me up, kind of caught myself, was just you want to like cheer on your child and like make it this big thing and like be so exciting that they're eating. And and I think, do you want to talk about a minute about like pressure, either positive or negative?
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up. And of course, I was laughing when you're saying that, because I know it's exactly what you're talking about. And Wendy Jo, when we were writing that section in the book about coaching or cheering your child on.
Yes.
And the only time we ever do that is chew, chew, chew. Because if you've got baby who's gagging or holding food in their mouth and they're like, I'm not really sure what to do here. And so it's chew, chew, chew. And that's really the only type of praising, clapping, coaching, whatever that we do really early on, because we don't want them to eat for us. We want them to eat for themselves and what they own, what they need. And so we don't praise. We coach it's really about safety, not, oh, you didn't eat this or you did eat this, yay. And they pick things up really, really early about what is pleasing to mom and dad. And, a lot of it has to do with temperament. And so if we can keep that more on a level of safety versus pressure or praise, then I think that can be really helpful. And when we see it turn into pressure, whether like that's either being eat less of this food or eat more of this food, the study suggests that children do the exact opposite.
Yes.
If you're push, they're not wanting to eat it. And if we restrict, that at some point when they're older, they'll find a way to get it, and they might be hiding or, hiding food. And then we're not supporting their level of trust. There's a story in Born to Eat that about a mom hiding food from their daughter, and whether the mom wanted that food for herself or not and just didn't want the kids to eat it up, that's one thing. But the message was, I can't trust you with food. So that was the internalized message that really hung with her whole life. And so, well, until she did her own work around that and realized it was,
yeah,
but so that was, pressure backfires usually in the exact opposite of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's super hard because you're really excited. It's so fun to see your little one try new things, and the faces they make are hilarious, and you're so interested, and it's all this stuff. But recognizing that, like you said, temperament matters. And sometimes, the very people pleaser child will just eat more and more and more to get more and more praise. Sometimes the sort of defiant, rebellious child will be like, well, you're praising me, and they're like, or you want me to do this, so I'm not going to. So it backfires. And recognizing, like, your child doesn't need your coaching. Your child just needs support and food and non-judgmental space to, like, explore and be curious, is actually a really big weight off of the parents' shoulders to recognize, like, oh, that's not my job. I don't need to do that.
And that's a great way to look at it, but it's hard in our culture. I mean, not everybody understands that or understands the research around pressure. There's a lot of controlling, and I'd say even with we still hear it even within our profession and within the medical profession and just in general. But children can definitely, and I think it goes back to that beginning where we were talking about, if parents or caregivers or health professionals don't know it for themselves, it's really hard to support it for others.
Oh yeah, so true.
It just goes really back to that foundation, personal or professional, that you're working with, a friend or even a health professional. It goes back to their own lived experience, which is why I think we really have to help everybody, realize that body trust is doable. It's doable.
Yeah, it's exactly why I do what I do.
Amen.
So I think another misconception that I found myself kind of falling into and struggling with my little ones and introducing solids is this. And again, even though I was educated on this and aware, I still found myself struggling. A child might try a food and spit it out and not like it, and I think a mistake parents make is to assume that means that they forever will not like that food. What do you want to say about that?
That is so true. So true. And I think one of our titles, I'd have to look at the book like right in front of me, but it was like, I don't like that today. And so, but yesterday I loved it, and I ate 2 helpings of it.
Right. Oh, so confusing.
So the thing about picky eating is, like, for most kids, there's this normal phase of when they're really finding that, like anyway, 2 to 3, even it could even be younger for many, where they're really they're feeling more independent, and they're trying new foods or they're not trying new foods. There's all these different, growth patterns, and it's different for different kids too, as well, that could impact that. But there's a phase of just, you liked that yesterday. Why don't you like it today? And, like, you can pull your hair out, but when we were writing the book, and we would always say it can take 10 to 15 introductions of a food. So keep trying. But when we were writing it, we were just, we humbled and just incredibly grateful to Jill Rapley, who wrote Baby Led Weaning, and to Katja Rao, the feeding doctor, who they both critically reviewed our manuscript. Cover to cover. And, Dr. Rao was like, 10 to 15 introductions is great, but you know what? For a lot of kids, it's a whole lot more. It could be 20 or 30. And so that was a eye-opening experience really for me while we were writing the book. And she's like, this is great, but it could take some kids, depending on their temperament or whatever issues are going on with them, it could take them more. So let's not limit it to 10 to 15 and encourage parents that, there are a lot of phases, and if we don't make a big deal out of it, for most children, that's not saying that's true for every child, but for most children, we can move past some picky stages. And I will say that has been true for my daughter as well. There are times where she will just eat a kale salad, and like we don't do that very often. I'll make scampi and kale salad, or that's one of the things that we make, and I buy the kits. Like I don't massage my own kale and all that.
Me neither.
does. So I like a little kit. That's the only way I'm eating a kale salad. And so she'll eat it, and then she'll be like, "This is amazing. This is so good." And then the next time you make it, she's like, "This is weird. Did they change the dressing?" And so it's like, you know what? I'm like, "You do you, babe. But when dinner's done, dinner's done. Do you understand? The kitchen is closed." Okay. And so
right.
But yeah, it's so interesting.
I think if parents can recognize that that's normal, and that that's okay, and that that's to be expected, I think that can ease a lot of suffering and a lot of anxiety that parents struggle with. Is like, oh no, my kid's never going to eat this. Oh no, I'm doing something wrong. I'm a terrible parent, right? You can easily snowball all of this, but just to recognize, no, sometimes they'll eat a bunch, and then the next day they won't eat very much. And sometimes they'll love the kale salad, and then the next time you have it, they're looking at it like it was the grossest thing in the world. Just to recognize that's normal. That's what literally most children are doing with their food.
Yeah.
It helps you be like, oh, okay, this is okay.
Yeah, just give up. It's so normal. And what's interesting is, like, I swear my little girl did not like pasta. Like, I always like to have this recipe that I love that's like a penne puttanesca sauce, and it's like that's the recipe that Leslie makes when there's company, and so I would always make it, and she would never eat it. And I was like, what in the world? And when she turned 5, I think, we met one of her buddies at an Italian restaurant, and he ordered spaghetti and meatballs. So she ordered spaghetti and meatballs, and now she likes pasta. But it didn't mean I wasn't going to serve this recipe that my family likes and enjoys. But it was, I'm going to put it on her plate. I'm also going to put the shaved Parmesan and the chicken and some other things on her plate. So I know she'll have some foods to try, but if she doesn't eat it, she doesn't eat it. But I'm going to keep making it for myself. And because that's what a family does, like I'm not going to not eat foods I like because she's not eating it.
That's another mistake people make, right, Leslie?
It's like, if you like steak, eat steak. If you like penne puttanesca, which is my favorite little sauce, then make it. And the other thing too is, like, I don't like asparagus. It's just not my jam. And, it's like, that's my personal preference, but I'm not going to be like, ew, asparagus. I'm going to let her make up her mind, and I'm going to suck it up, and I'm going to take one for the team because everybody else in my family likes it. And sometimes it's going to be on exposure and decide for herself. And that's something else parents can do, is like, if you truly have a food preference of something that you just don't like, still try to find a way to incorporate it. It could be at a restaurant, or, it could be, it could be you just make it and you put it on your plate and you may or may not eat it or whatever. But that's how they get exposure. And so it doesn't have to be all the time. But, I put asparagus in her lineup, even though I know my husband likes it, and, she'll try it or she won't, but I want her to have that exposure. And I'm not going to say yuck or ooh, or just, they can feed into that, and I'm just not going to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's such a good point. Just to expect the feeding dynamic to be dynamic, right? Like I didn't even think of that till it came out of my mouth, but it's going to be fluid. It's going to be messy. It's going to be a little bit unpredictable. And I think that just knowing that and coming into it with eyes wide open can be so helpful, to not then internalize that as meaning that you're a terrible parent, or you're not doing your job, or your kid is never going to ever like vegetables, or whatever parents tell themselves, right?
I mean, listen, I about fell off my island chair when she ate that kale salad because I had put it on her. And listen, we don't have that every week. That's not on the menu every week. But I don't want it to sound like Leslie just eats kale salad because I don't. We probably eat it like twice a month. But she had seen it like 10,
Is it the Costco
15,
one?
Or yeah, the one with like cranberry.
Oh yeah. That one's so good.
There's no way I could come up with that little recipe and mix that all up.
No way.
So, but she had seen it 1,000 times, and then she's like, "Oh, okay, this is cool," and so it works. And like this is, like you, it's like this is what we do, and we still see it play out in our own lives. Of like, okay, and to this day, she will leave a brownie on her plate, and
yeah, I know, it's amazing.
Dessert after. If we do a dessert type food, we say food is food. And even when she's hearing it at school, I'm like a treat or whatever, and I'm like, babe, food is food. And she knows that's kind of our mantra. And so when we have brownies or whatever, then we probably make them once a week, and we'll have it on the dinner plate, and she'll eat it. And sometimes she'll leave half of it behind. Sometimes she'll eat it all, but she didn't have to eat her meal to get to it. And I will say that something I did prior to even having children, that was a recommendation. I'm like, we are teaching them to overeat if they have to eat something else first.
Yeah.
And if we're following the division of responsibilities where we decide the what, when, where, then we can decide to put a brownie on the plate or strawberries or nothing of that nature, because we're in charge of that. And then they can decide if and how much. And, I think as parents and as, for you and I, like nutrition professionals, like it's our job to teach our children how to deal with all foods, regardless of its nutritional value, in a healthy way. And that takes exposure and without pressure.
Oh, such a good point. Oh, let's frame that and put it on the wall. I love that. One of the things I really loved about your book is you talk a lot about instilling trust, like we talked about earlier, but then also this sense of body positivity. And again, you alluded to this earlier. If the parent or caregiver hasn't, learned this for themselves, it's really tough for them to show or teach or set an example to trust. But I'm really interested to hear I know why you put this body positivity stuff in there, but I'm interested to know, what was your thought process, and do you see that as kind of setting the book apart from other books that might talk about like how to feed your child or similar types of books? Was there a purpose in that body positivity piece that you put in there, knowing, all of the stuff that you do with eating disorders and all of that? I was just curious about that part of it.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, just like in being a professional, you can only take someone as far as you've taken yourself. And if you're hung up as a parent, I mean, will that leave you with limitations as you're instilling these values and hopefully resilience and diet culture for your kids? And having seen that play out in my practice, it was so important for me to put that in the book, to have, chapter 10, like if you have a parent that's like, I don't feel like I trust my own body, how do I do this? Chapter 10, start there. And
it's a great chapter.
Thank you. And so it was so important to us. And the other thing that was important to us is like, we wanted it to be non-diet. We wanted it to be body positive. We wanted it to not be shaming, regardless of the feeding method that you picked. And we really couldn't call it, non-diet approach for the family, because what publisher even knows what that means. And so we're like, this is how we're like on purpose sliding in non-diet, health at every size principles. To the best time to do this is when you're starting with a child. I mean, we are looking at like Born to Eat is different from the other feeding books because it's a family approach, and it's a philosophy for lifelong body trust. And that we wanted it to be the Control-Alt-Delete for parents who are stuck in diet culture. I'm like, here's how you get out, and you do it by watching this amazing child show you that we're born with it.
Oh, I love that. It's so preventative in nature too, right? So again, the parent can work on their own relationship with food in their body. But if I could wave my magic wand and say every child who is born from now on will have a sense of body positivity and a sense of trust with their body and a sense of support and comfort and, pleasantness with food, like, and non-judgmental, what's the word I'm looking for? Not intensely pressuring. I think we'd prevent eating disorders. It's such an important piece of this puzzle of prevention.
Absolutely. And I can tell you, Wendy Jo and I were talking as right when we got our manuscript back we had our own people that we asked to review it, and Dr. Rao and Jill Rapley just selflessly gave us so much of their time and sent us so many comments that really, really helped us. But when Dr. Rao sent back her praise quote for the book, I was like, yes, that's what we wanted.
Yeah.
And, listen, I've learned in publishing that people can send you, sit there here's what I wanted to say. Will you sign it? I mean, people do that type of stuff, but we did not do that. We didn't know you could do that. And we wanted it to be authentic and genuine. And what she said was exactly what we wanted. And what you said is being preventative. And she said, Born to Eat answered all my questions about baby-led weaning. Leslie and Wendy Jo will help parents raise children who feel good about food and their bodies, which is preventative medicine at its best.
Love it.
When we got that back from her, I was like, that is what we wanted. That is what we wanted. And we were just so lucky. And no matter what method a parent chooses, if they choose spoon feeding and they're responsive or whatever, you can still just build resilience by helping a child learn to trust themselves. And so it's not, exclusive to this particular method. It's exclusive to just all bodies are good bodies. And how do we teach that? And with body trust.
Beautifully done. Really amazing job. I know you need to get going. And before you do, would you just take a minute to talk about how people can buy the book, check it out, check out your work, that type of stuff?
Sure. Thank you. And let me thank you. It's just an honor when you email me. I was like, yay, it's such an honor. So glad to just be able to talk to you and be on the podcast. And you can buy the book pretty much anywhere books are sold. You might have to order it if you walk into a bookstore. Some of them have them on the shelves. Amazon is a good place to get them. Wendy Jo and I can both send signed copies if needed. If for anybody, we have these cute little bibs that we have that are great little shower gifts too. But we're on Instagram and Facebook at Born to Eat Book. That's also our website. We've got some other fun stuff, coming down the pipe that we're working on to hopefully help support parents. And then my personal, you can find me socially. I guess the thing I do the most is really Instagram. That's where you can find me. I'm just at Leslie Schilling. That's my website as well, leslieschilling.com. Twitter and Facebook, Nutrition Leslie, although I pretty much live on Instagram. So if you want to find me socially, that's where you find me. And Wendy Jo, we post together on at Born to Eat Book. So.
Yeah. Well, I think that it would be such a good gift for a baby shower or something like that. That when you mentioned that, I was like, oh yeah, that's a really good idea.
Yeah, we've been doing little num spoons, easy peasy mats, a bib, and the book to kind of do a little baby shower little bundle there. So, but yeah, it's fun. It's been fun. The book has been it's available in Spanish now, and we are scheduled to record for Audible this month, so hopefully it'll be out on Audible in the next couple of months. So
congratulations!
Thank you.
That is such a big deal. Wow, amazing! I'm so glad that you guys have taken the time to write this book and been so thoughtful in how you approach the conversations about nutrition and bodies and food and feeding, and so much of it is such tricky territory, but you guys do such a good job exploring the nuance and, leaving it open for parents to do what's best for them. And I think you just did such a great job with this book, and I'm super happy to help other people find it and learn about it and hopefully use it in their homes. So thanks so much, Leslie, for being here. This was awesome.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Well, I sincerely hope you've enjoyed this conversation. If you haven't already, please go ahead and leave a review on iTunes. Thanks again so much for listening, and we'll see you soon for another episode.